Hi everyone, Yosh Rau here with Field One Paintball. This video is going to go over the basic maintenance for your Field One Force Nucleus Engine. As always, before working on any marker, make sure that you removed all paintballs and completely degassed the marker. Alright, so we're going to jump right into it. To start with, as always, you want to make sure that you've completely degassed the marker. So if you need to, take a clearing shot, make sure the air system is removed. And make sure that you've removed all paintballs from the marker as well, just for safety. Now, to get right into this, to remove your nucleus engine, all we're going to do is lift the back cap here. If you do have gas in the marker, the Force is designed to have a gas interlock with the back cap. So essentially what that is it makes it so that if the marker is gassed up, you won't be able to lift this to remove the engine. So if you're dealing with a lot of resistance here when you try to pull up, one thing to make sure of is just to make sure that you've taken all the gas out of the marker. So we've degassed the gun. Now we're going to pull the engine out. We're going to lift the back cap, which will expose a little bit of the nucleus engine there. And then simply we're going to pull the engine free from the marker. So here we have it, the nucleus engine for the Force. I'm going to quickly describe some of the components here, and then we'll go over basic maintenance. We found that basic maintenance can basically be toolless, which is great. You don't need to disassemble the engine fully to do that type of maintenance. And we're talking, the stuff that you might do, after a long weekend of play or before you're going to have a couple sets of practices. But the engine itself doesn't require, a ton of maintenance, just a little bit of lube in some key areas, and it'll be good to keep running for you. So, just to describe a couple of the parts here, we've got our back cap. Our ram housing is this red spot here. Volume chamber up front, our bolt tip, and inside here you can see the brass shutoff, and just ahead of that is the ram. So you will get another look at the ram once we separate the volume chamber from the ram housing. So, like I said before, we don't really need tools. All we're going to do is we're going to separate the volume chamber from the ram housing. And we can do that with our hands. So start by turning those two parts apart and unscrewing them. Now, if that's too difficult and you've got these together really tight, then we don't really think you need tools to do that, but you might be aided by using a soft cloth, and you can grip the volume chamber and pull it apart easily that way. So that's a little thing you can do. If that doesn't work and you're still having a hard time getting this apart, there are some wrench flats here. So you can use a crescent wrench or a spanner to separate your volume chamber from your ram housing. We don't recommend sticking tools into any of these holes to try to torque it off. This should be just a hand tight assembly, and so with that it should be a hand loosen assembly as well. So we're going to separate the volume chamber from the ram housing, and now we're going to see our ram. The ram is one of the critical areas that needs grease in order for the engine to work properly. It doesn't need that much, just a thin coating. And if there's any, grime or paint or sand or anything like that, from the environment that you've been playing in, it's a good idea to wipe that off, wipe off any old grease, and then reapply. Inside of our ram housing here, you can see the end of what we call the reduction shaft. This shaft actually powers the ram and bolt system forward. Internally in the ram. Doesn't really need a lot of service, but we will get some grease there as we do this basic maintenance. So, a couple key spots to add lube. We're going to take our Field One Pro Lube here, and we're just going to apply a thin coating to our ram O-ring, which is a number 11 U-cup. Now, you don't need to know all of the sizes of O-rings in your marker or in your engine. You can always consult your quick start guide or your user's manual, or even come back to this video if you ever needed to replace it. But basic maintenance for the engine definitely does not require replacing any O-rings. One of the things that we wanted designed into this marker, one of the things that we really focused on, was creating a system that would be resilient and need very little changing out of O-rings. And we've accomplished that with a lot of thought and some testing and some changes. But one of the things that we incorporated were these directional U-cups. So this number 11 U-cup is a directional U-cup. There's a few more inside the engine. And basically the benefit of using the U-cups is that there's a lot less friction in one direction, and they also don't wear out or get out of tolerance very quickly, because in one direction they're basically getting zero wear, and in the other direction they get inflated when air gets into them. So that creates a better seal, which in effect only seals when there's air against it. So, very limited friction, doesn't need to be replaced. We actually have a majority of the dynamic O-rings in the engine as directional U-cups. And dynamic is just another word for the O-rings that either are in motion when the gun is firing or have something moving against them. Static O-rings will be the ones that don't move while the engine is in use. So just to get back to our easy maintenance here, we're going to apply a little bit of light grease to our ram O-ring. We're going to apply a little bit of light grease to our ram shaft. And then just to make sure that this reduction shaft in here gets a little bit of lube, I'm going to just apply a little bit here to the back of the ram. And if you look at that, you can see just by getting some grease into that hole there, it's going to lube that reduction shaft because that part fits inside. The next spot that we're going to lube is going to be our bolt stem. And this stem rides up against that directional U-cup. It's a 110 that sits in front of the volume chamber. And so we want a nice smooth movement with a good seal there. And then the last thing that I'll probably lube here is going to be just this part of the ram here that sits in front of the shutoff. And this can be reached if you have like a cotton swab or something like that. You can just put a dot of grease there. And this is more, an extra step that I like to take, but that will find its way into the shutoff and keep that front shutoff O-ring nice and lubed. So that's essentially it. I mean, all of the stuff that we just covered there, the ram shaft O-ring, the ram shaft itself, the back of the ram shaft so that it can get on the reduction shaft, and the bolt stem. Those are our critical areas to add a little bit of lube. Last thing that I want to talk about in terms of the bolt lube and how much you need, just a thin coating will do it. If you put too much in there, that lube will eventually find its way somewhere where it's not supposed to be. The O-rings are going to push it around, the air is going to push it around. So just a nice light coating. A common thing that we see sometimes with the bolt O-rings is people over lube those. This can really get a thin coating. Usually whatever's left on my fingers from doing the rest of this, I'll apply to these bolt head O-rings. And the reason you don't want to put too much grease on those is if you over grease these O-rings, you can end up kind of gunking up your eye ports, and that could prevent your eyes from working properly. So now we're all lubed up. Next step is to put it back together. Simply going to put these together, screw your volume chamber to your ram housing, and that needs to be tight. So I gave it a crank with my hands, that should do it. If you have a hard time closing this gap, so there's a little gap here between the volume chamber and the ram housing, again, just use a clean soft towel and you can give it a little twist just to make sure that you've got it nice and tight. The next thing we're gonna do is apply a little bit of lube to these outside O-rings that seal up against the inside of the body. We've got our 20 on the front here, and then these at the rear of the volume chamber and the rear of the ram housing are 21s. So again, light coating there just to help this slide into the marker. All right, so now we're ready to slide this back into the body of the marker. So again, we want to lift up our back cap, and this will just slide right in, push it all the way until it stops, and then push your back cap down until it clicks shut and you've completely closed this gap here. Now we are ready to shoot, ready to go back out there, air up, do your normal setup, go have fun. Thanks for watching our video. To view or download the complete user's manual, or for more information, please visit fieldonepaintball.com.